First, if you're watching this, it means you know the pain of loss. And first and most importantly, I'm so deeply sorry, more sorry than I can say for this loss because really it's not enough to say someone died. Your whole world has exploded. Who you probably are. Your sense of self has been changed. Everything has been rearranged. And a lot of times, part of that feeling is indicative that what you are experiencing is not just grief, it is also trauma. And this is a crucial part of understanding your experience with this loss. Because when we experience trauma without knowing it, often what happens is we feel like we are bad, we are doing something wrong, we are somehow weak for not being able to continue to function in the way we were. So that's what this video is about. It's helping you understand, have you experienced traumatic grief and then what to do with that information. So first, how do you know if you've experienced traumatic loss? Something really important that I talk to a lot of people about. They think that they have to be at the event for something to be traumatic. That's not true. Um, you love someone so much, the person who died, you love them so much. And so, because of that, what happened to them, the way they died, it's going to have an enormous impact on you, on your brain. Okay. So trauma is anytime something happens that is too much for our brain to process. So it could be that the loss happened too quickly, meaning it was very sudden or unexpected. It was like too violent in a way. So there was a violence to it, to the way they died. It was too early. They didn't get to live a full life. They didn't get to live to old age, but just a too muchness of it is that's what the trauma is. So to give an example of traumatic losses, if the loss happens before the person reaches old age, it's considered traumatic. Okay. If there was any violence to the way the person died, and this actually can include medical illness because sometimes seeing someone's body go through the pain of certain illnesses, there's a violence to that, right? Um, and then obviously if it's a homicide, if it's a suicide, if someone dies to an overdose, or if there's questions about is this suicide or not, like all of that is very, very traumatic to our brain and our body. Um, yeah, any death where you didn't get to say goodbye, where you weren't able to give love to the person as they were dying. These are all traumatic deaths. And it doesn't matter if you were super close with the person, if they were important to you, if you love them deeply, then then it impacts you. A lot of times we try to like reason with ourselves why something shouldn't be traumatic or shouldn't be impacting us so deeply, whether it's because we weren't at the scene of the death. So we're like, why are the images of how they died going through our head? Or maybe we weren't close at the time of our death. So we're thinking, I shouldn't be as impacted. But the truth is, you're watching this video because you are deeply impacted by this loss. We want to believe your experience you're having because, regardless of what everyone's saying about what your grief should look like, the truth is, if you're watching this video, you probably feel like you're not okay and like you need help. And that matters, and that feeling is real. And we want to listen to that feeling. So here's a few questions I'm going to ask to help you understand if this loss is traumatic and kind of like how deeply this trauma is impacting you. So if you have intrusive thoughts or images, that means that you're not trying to pull up images or thoughts about the way they died, but those thoughts and images are still coming into your head. Okay, so like for example, my brother died by suicide. I was replaying his suicide. I did not see it, but my brain had come up with images of his suicide, or thoughts about what he might have felt before he died, and I was thinking about that over and over again, thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I torturing myself with this? I thought I was choosing these thoughts, even though I tried to push them away and that wouldn't work. What I didn't know was that this is indicative of trauma. Okay, my brain, it's like my brain couldn't process what happened, so it's trying to kind of process this experience as a memory. You know, if you think of like a web page that won't load, that's kind of what your brain feels like with this death. It's like, I can't load this. It's too big. I can't kind of process what's happened. So part of that can be these intrusive images of the way they died, of even the funeral, of seeing their body, all these type of things. Um, Also, with that, there can be intrusive images, almost like hallucinations sometimes. That's something I experience, that's something some people I speak to experience. That doesn't mean you're not. A lot of times you can know that the things you're seeing aren't real. I really experienced this after my sister and nieces died. And it was very strange because I knew what I was seeing, envisioning wasn't real. Part of me knew that, but it also felt very real. Um, all of this to say, when we're experiencing these things, a lot of times we're thinking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my brain? Your brain is trying to process something that's too big. And when we'll talk a little bit about PTSD symptoms, what we begin to realize is our brain is actually responding to this enormous traumatic loss exactly the way it's designed to. It's allowing us to continue to function, and that is helpful in short term. It allows us to get up, to go to work, to do all the things we need to do, but long term living in that trauma is it's not a pleasant or helpful way to live, and that's why we need help. We need help processing something like this. Um, our body really reacts to traumatic loss. So that can look like being really jumpy, being really irritable, not being able to sleep well, or feeling exhausted no matter how much sleep you get. You feel like you can't concentrate or remember things. Maybe you're making mistakes at work that you never did. You might feel really irritable. You might feel numb and disconnected from everything, almost like you're not actually living your life. You can also have other physical symptoms like your chest feels tight, you feel nauseous, you feel dizzy, you're gaining weight, you're losing weight, your body's just being really impacted by what's happened. That's indicative of how traumatic this loss is, that your nervous system, which affects both our mind and our body, right, is so impacted by this that we've gone into survival mode. So we're not really worried. Our brain and our body aren't really worried about the sustainability of coping with this experience because it thinks that your life is literally in danger. That's what your brain and body absorbed from how awful this loss has been. It's thinking our life is literally under threat. So we're not worried about things like emotional regulation, appetite regulation, really long-term sustainable regulation of everything. We're in survival mode. And again, that is not indicative of your brain and body doing anything wrong. That is indicative of how traumatic, painful, awful, soul-crushing this loss is. It's really, it's crushing. Yeah. This is so important to understand because regular grief support can actually make traumatic loss worse. So phrases like feel your feelings, lean into the pain, talk about what happened, that can re-traumatize you. So because your brain cannot process this experience, when you talk about the way your person died, your brain doesn't can't fully comprehend, it hasn't been able to store this experience as a past experience. So if you talk about this is how my person died, you might physically and emotionally feel like they are dying right now. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because this event is too big to process on your own. Just like if you get a physical wound, you go get care, right? You go see a doctor. If you break a bone, you need to go see a doctor. The doctor needs to set it. That's true when we experience traumatic moments. We need care in helping our brain process this experience, integrate this experience, right? Also, a lot of like typical grief support doesn't make room for the horror, the ugliness of traumatic loss and how it disturbs you and can change you on a fundamental level. So, with that, we're not told how to integrate the loss into our lives, into ourself, which is the emotionally healthy thing to do, which means we allow this loss to change us. We allow the trauma to change us. Of course, we want to do that in ways that feel safe, in ways that help us build a gentler life, in ways that honor the love we have for this person who died. So, because people don't understand that what you've experienced is traumatic loss, a lot of times they have really unfair expectations. You might have unfair expectations on yourself, feeling like you should be doing better than you are. This can look like in the short term, like when people like pushing people away who want to help because it's just overwhelming. It's just overwhelming to connect. Connection can even feel unsafe in trauma because you always feel so unsafe. You might be numbing your grief with work, with substances, with social media. Um, you might be really just trying to please everyone around you because any type of conflict just feels dangerous. You can't handle it, and you really can't. I think that's again important if you're experiencing any of those things. If you are numbing with substances, with, whatever it is, or if you're being really irritable, it's important to understand that again, this is a mark of how much pain you are in, that your body and brain are screaming we can't function normally with this amount of pain. So we have to people please on a whole new level. We have to numb ourselves to an extreme amount, you know. We have to feel rage to be able to protect ourselves because we feel so scared all the time. So we understand that that's why we're doing these things because we're in so much pain. But the problem is that long term, that type of life looks exhausting and miserable, and we lose our sense of self and we lose energy to be able to have pockets of coziness, safety, enjoyment amid the grief that I believe and talking to people, most people experience will always be there, right? So the goal isn't to fix you, to fix this grief, because that can't be fixed, but it is to help your brain process this so that our body and brain can feel a little safer, a little more connected to the people who love us, so that we can build a life that feels safe and cozy and gentle as we grieve, as we continue to miss the person who died, and as we also try to continue to find things that help life feel meaningful, maybe sometimes even a little enjoyable at times. And that never erases the grief, it doesn't balance it out. But we want to make space, we want to learn how to hold those other feelings too. Um, so, what do we do now that we know all this? It can be so overwhelming. So, what's important is again being able to understand, getting more trauma education, what's going on with my body. Why am I being irritable? Why am I numbing myself? That's important because it helps us be compassionate towards ourselves. It helps us stop shaming ourselves for these coping mechanisms that we might not always like, but ultimately we might need to survive. Right now, we want to learn how to, the world already feels so unsafe because someone we love died, because the trauma taught us how unsafe the world can be. We want to make our mind a safer place. The first step to that is compassion. And in order to have compassion, we need to understand what's going on in our brain, in our body, from experiencing this very traumatic loss. And what's important then, too, is understanding we need proper treatment. What that looks like is proper therapy, proper care. This can be somatic approaches. This is what I use in my grief coaching practice, where we use the body to process the grief. which can look like the way we explore emotions is different. We think about where do I feel that emotion in my body? What color might that emotion be? We explore things in a little more creative ways. We do guided meditations to help give our body a little bit of rest. Um, EMDR, there's some other body-based practices that really work, like acupuncture. Um, we want ultimately to someone that feels very safe, someone that isn't scared of our pain, because that actually helps our nervous system as well, that co-regulation. So we're looking for people who believe in the validity of our pain, who are gentle to us as we're in so much pain. Um, that's what we want. You also want to know tools like how do you ground yourself when you're feeling really triggered? What do I do when intrusive images pop up? How do I process guilt, navigate night terrors? Part of why those specific types of skills are so important is trauma. Trauma does tend, the one thing of hope I want to give you is that when we treat trauma, the PTSD symptoms, like the things I just mentioned, the night terrors, the extreme irritability, the feeling so physically, emotionally overwhelmed and flooded, those tend to get better when we get trauma care. And it's also true that they do tend to come back around anniversaries and things like that because again, our brain is scanning, looking for signs of not being safe in the world, because that's when we need to go into the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response to keep ourselves safe. Anniversaries are a time of year when our brain's gonna go, something happened, something really bad and dangerous happened around this time a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Certain smells can bring that back, things like that. And these PTSD symptoms can come up again. That's very normal. That's very normal for people to experience them throughout the years. So, our goal is not necessarily to completely erase the trauma because we don't want to feel like failures for just feeling torn apart by something that is truly awful. But we do want tools so that we know how to calm ourselves and be loving to ourselves in those moments. So, that does look like having tools that help you cope with the trauma of this. So, where to start? If you're listening to this, you're feeling panicky, you're thinking, I'm not sure what to do. That's exactly why I've got my boundaries course. This course is specifically for how do I protect myself now that I know I have traumatic grief. Boundaries look different when you know you have traumatic grief. You're more protective of yourself. This means that I have, different levels of boundaries. The first level, the safest, easiest way to start is with avoidance. Avoidance can be a very helpful boundary tool, and that's okay to use it. We're operating under the understanding that you're wounded, that you have limited energy now. Protection is going to look different. Boundaries are going to need to look different than sometimes what we typically read, right? Typically, we read boundaries, we need to state them clearly. Often where there's a level of confrontation that might be involved. We also might feel from reading things that are very helpful that we need to make big dramatic boundaries, and it just doesn't feel doable to hold those things while we're grieving. Those feelings are real. We want to listen to them. We want to listen to our limits. And that's what this course teaches you. It teaches you how to protect yourself, how to make boundaries within the limits you're at. So it's a really important way to start helping you find a sense of safety in this world that now feels so unsafe. My other course, Navigating Traumatic Grief, is also really helpful. We talk about the types of therapies that are helpful. We talk about why your body is reacting the way it is. I've set up this course so that it's something you can listen to year after year as you come up on anniversaries and need to be reminded, why am I having these night terrors? Is something wrong with me? And you can listen to this video and be reminded, this is my brain doing what it's supposed to. It's trying to protect me after experiencing such a massive heartbreak. Um, and I also have grounding practices that can help you in moments like through panic attacks, through just moments that feel overwhelming. We've got all the tools in there to help you start to craft a life that feels gentle, to help you start to get the care you need. Um, so I really recommend starting there. If you have any questions, please email me. I'll also put a link to a free consultation if you need more one-on-one care. Um, but most of all, I just want you to know you're not being dramatic for like when you're honest about how deeply impacted you are by this loss. You've experienced an enormous wound to your brain, your body, and your heart, right? Trauma is literally your brain is wounded. Grief tears your heart apart. It tears you apart as a person. So if you take anything from this video, I want it to be to believe yourself when you're expressing how much this hurts, because this hurt is real.